Did you know sensory overload is the #1 trigger to meltdowns in sensory kids? And the way to prevent it is through a sensory diet. I'm Lisa, a child behavior expert and a parent coach. I have over a decade of experience as a pediatric occupational therapist. I've worked with hundreds of families who are struggling with daily meltdowns with their sensory kid. So I know how exhausting it can be and frustrating to be dealing with your child's daily meltdowns. But once parents started working with me and realized that a sensory diet was the way out of these meltdowns, they started seeing results fast. They didn't experience the daily meltdowns that they were having months, years on end. These cycles were ending because they were consistently implementing a sensory diet. In this video, I'm going to tell you the steps on creating the perfect sensory diet for your child. So mornings are one of the most stressful times of parents who are raising a sensory child. I had a client who completely refused to get out of bed every single morning. So it was a battle. Mom would be repeating herself, nagging at him to try to get him out of bed. When he finally did, getting him through a morning routine was like pulling teeth. It was constant reminders, constant yelling and screaming. He would say no, he would run away, try to get on his iPad, do everything possible to avoid getting the morning routine done. His parents tried every parenting trick under the sun. They tried speaking gently to him because gentle parenting taught that if you speak nicely, if you speak with a soft tone, that you would get your kids to comply. But that just did not work. It completely backfired. So then they tried a more authoritarian approach where they used punishments and threats to try to get their child to comply. But that just ended up with more battles. Another parent who worked with me was struggling with their child's avoidant and defiant behavior whenever they came home from school. And it was just baffling her why her child was behaving this way. Because at school, her teacher would always tell her that your child is an angel. She's always listening. She's the best helper. She never gets into trouble. But yet, when her child comes home, it's like a different story. Her child would always melt down if she asked her to go get a snack, if she told her to just go sit down and do her homework. It would lead into a big meltdown. And she just could not understand why this was happening. These parents were completely exhausted. And I completely understand having a child that pushes back on you, that has so many meltdowns throughout their day, is both physically and mentally exhausting as parents have to deal with. Many of these parents felt like they were walking on eggshells. When it was time for their child to come home, they weren't sure what state of mind they were going to be in, and if this was going to be a short meltdown or if it was going to last the entire evening. Over time, being stuck in these meltdown cycles often led to a lot of tension and stress in the household. Parents would tell me that they were really having a hard time finding a good connection with their child. They often resented being around them, feeling annoyed and frustrated all the time. This ended up causing a lot of rifts in the relationship. Their children, you could see that they were not enjoying their parents' company either, and it was literally pulling families further and further apart. What these parents really did not know was the root cause of the meltdowns. Parents were just seeing the bad behavior and we're just reacting and responding to that. But what was really going on beneath the surface was a sensory need that was not being met. And with sensory kids, we have to remember that they have different thresholds of sensory input. So when there's a lot of loud sounds, when there's bright lights, when there's just a lot of things going on in their environment, they can get dysregulated much more easily than your average kid. So once parents understood this and they really started to see and piece things together, they noticed that a lot of the meltdowns always had a trigger before that. When kids were struggling to get ready in the morning, they were pushing back, they knew that their child always had a hard time with certain textures, with certain things in their clothing, and that was actually the root cause of what was causing them to push back and then eventually blow up into these crazy meltdowns. So we're going to get into what exactly is a sensory diet. I'm sure at this point you are just wondering what exactly is it and how do I actually create one for my child? So we're going to get into that. But before we do, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss an episode like this. So what exactly is a sensory diet? It's a set of activities designed to give your child the right kind of sensory input for their particular sensory need. So just think of it like food. When you need food to fuel your body, you eat certain foods so that you feel energized. Now, with a sensory diet, you're giving your child certain sensory input to fuel their bodies so that they feel good as well. So the first step in finding the right sensory diet is to first identify what kind of sensory profile does your child have. Are they a sensory avoider where they get overwhelmed by sensory input easily? So if there was a loud sound like an alarm or a vacuum going off, or if they're complaining that the tags on their clothes are really itchy, or if they're just avoiding a lot of different tasks because something feels really uncomfortable to them, those are signs that your child has avoidant behaviors. Or they might be a sensory seeker where they're constantly seeking sensory input in their environment. So you might see your child constantly moving, they're fidgeting at their desk, they can't seem to sit still, they're losing focus because of that. Or they might be mouthing things, they're taking the collars of their shirt and chewing on it, or their sleeves, they're chewing on their hair, they're constantly touching their hair. Those are signs that your child is seeking sensory input to help them feel good, or in other words, to feel regulated. Your child might also have a mix of both sensory seeking and avoidant behaviors, and that is completely normal. We actually see a lot more mixed type of profiles than we do of just solely only one. And that's because everyone's sensory system is completely different. And so you can have one sensory system that is craving certain input. So it might be your vestibular system that really wants movement. So you see your child constantly moving, constantly fidgeting, trying to get that input, but they are sensitive with their tactile. So they really don't like certain textures. They don't like getting their hands wet, touching mushy things. And so it is normal if you're noticing a total mix of different sensory profiles. Now, the next step, once you've identified their profile, is to find the right match of activities to their profile. So if you have a sensory avoider who is, let's say, struggling to get up in the morning, this is what a sensory diet may look like. You would start off by giving your child a slow rise to the morning, because for a lot of our sensory avoiders, they feel quite overwhelmed when they wake up in the morning and they know that they have all these activities, all these tasks that they need to do that they really do not like brushing their teeth, getting dressed. Those can be really big triggers for sensory avoiders. So if we wake them up too jarringly with a blaring alarm, that is going to send their nervous system already into a fight or flight, and they are not going to be able to tolerate the uncomfortable sensations even more so. So if we can wake them up with a slower pace, and a really great tool that I recommend to all my clients who have sensory avoiders is to use something called a sunset clock. If you haven't heard of it, it is a clock that slowly brightens its light. So it starts off quite dim and it brightens up, and it uses a very nice orange yellowish kind of light. And it also has different settings of sounds that you can use. So you can have birds chirping, a waterfall kind of sound. This is a much nicer way to wake up, and it can help your child start their days on the right foot. Now, after they've woken up, you're going to start by setting 5 to 10 minutes of a nice relaxation, wake up kind of routine. This is where you can start doing some deep breathing with them. And you're gonna have to teach your kids how to do that. There's so many different ways to teach deep breathing. A really great breathing tool that I always like to teach parents to teach their kids is the 5 breath in, 5 breath out method. You're teaching your kids to breathe in through their nose for 5 seconds, and then breathe out through their mouth with 5 seconds, and make sure they're pursing their lips while they're doing it. So it just looks like this. Now, for some of our kids, they need more of a visual. So a really handy tool is actually just to use your hand. So you're going to get your child to trace their hands up and down. And every time they're tracing upwards, they're taking a deep breath in. And then every time they're tracing their hands down, they're breathing out. So they're breathing in for 5 seconds and out. In, out, and so on. Next, you can add in some fun stretches to get their bodies moving and their blood flowing. So just doing some simple yoga exercises or just simple stretches that you would learn in gym class, reaching over the head like this, reaching down towards your feet. This is just gonna get their bodies moving and waking up, because a lot of our avoiders, they really struggle with that transition from sleeping to getting up and feeling energized. So this is a really great sensory diet for them that you need to consistently implement to help them get their bodies ready. This is a better transition now into the actual routine of getting their teeth brushed, washing their face, getting dressed. Now, another really important tip is to break these tasks down for them, because for a sensory avoider, it feels very overwhelming to be doing so many different tasks that do not feel comfortable for them. So if you can break the task down from brushing their teeth, taking a nice little break where they can do more stretches, they can do some deep breathing, then moving on to the next activity where they can go and get a drink of water and then do the next activity. Now, I know this might feel like it's going to take a lot of extra time. At first, it will, because you need to get into the habit of this. But my big tip here is that you need to start being more proactive about the sensory diet and also start building in more time. Because I know for a lot of parents, they've told me that, I just don't have time to get my kids to do the sensory diet and to build in all these breaks. And the reality is, you really have to make accommodations for your child when they do struggle like this in order for them to be successful. So you will have to start shifting their sleep schedule a little bit to bring out more time for yourself in the morning. So that will look like waking up 30 minutes earlier in order for you to implement the sensory diet. And it's just like a habit. At the beginning, it will always feel really hard because you're not used to it and your child's not used to it. But once you create the habit and you do this for a couple of weeks, it will start to feel much more easier and doable, and you're going to start reaping the benefits of the sensory diet. So you might have a sensory seeker and their sensory diet is going to look different. Now, sensory seekers, they tend to have the hardest time during that bedtime wind down period. Parents are really struggling during that time because their kids are wanting so much stimuli. They're seeking that input. So they might be wanting to be on their iPads, watching TV, because that visual stimuli is what they're seeking for. Or they might be moving around all the time, jumping, crashing on the furniture, and it's so hard to get them to settle down and transition to their bed and to fall asleep. So what the sensory diet is going to look like is more of rough and tumble play and heavy work. And also to note, if your child is really seeking that iPad, that screen time, you have to set a very firm boundary on this. You need to make sure your child is not looking at the screen at least an hour. I recommend more like 2 hours before bedtime, because the lights from the screens actually keep your child up at night. It actually overstimulates their visual system, and it's much harder for them to shut down at the end of the night. It actually affects their sleep cycle as well. So you need to eliminate screen times 1 to 2 hours before bed in order to support your sensory seeker. Now, you're going to also incorporate more rough and tumble play, because that is going to help them to get out all that pent up energy. Your child is actually already trying to do that. They're trying to move around because they have all that energy, but you need to do that effectively. So getting them to crash into crash pads. Now, a great way to do that is get really big pillows, get beanbag chairs. I have these big cushions from an old couch of mine that I kept, and I just put them on the floor. And I let my kid just run and crash into that right before bed, because that is going to help them to get that energy out. If you're someone who enjoys rough and tumble play, do that with them, because that, again, is going to help get all that energy out. And some other really good ideas that I'm going to throw in here is getting them to do animal walks across the hallway. So they're going to bear walk across the floor. They can do some donkey kicks where they put their 2 hands on the ground and they're kicking their legs out. You can get them to carry heavy things like a heavy laundry bag or the laundry hamper and do like a relay race. that is adding to that deep pressure, or what we call proprioceptive input that your child is seeking for. And just a little bit about proprioception. Now, we all have a proprioceptive system, and that is actually found in the receptors in our joints and our muscles. And so what this system tells us is, if let's say you're picking up a really heavy box, your brain is telling you, how much force do I need to actually pick up that box? You're obviously going to brace yourself if you know it's heavy, and your brain is telling you that. That system for sensory seekers is actually craving a lot of input, and that actually helps to ground their bodies and make them feel more regulated. So whenever you're in doubt, always incorporate proprioceptive or deep pressure type of activities. If you have a child who is showing a sign of both seeking and avoidant behaviors, then you are really incorporating both the sensory diets from what I mentioned in the sensory avoidant and also the seeking behaviors. You're going to incorporate both into your child's daily routine. Now, why do sensory diets work? Because they actually target the root cause to your child's meltdowns. When you have a sensory child, they have a sensory system that is different than most kids. And so they get uncomfortable, they get overwhelmed much more easily, that the sensory diet helps to regulate their nervous system before they get to a state of dysregulation. So it is very important that with sensory diets that you're being proactive, that you're doing them in a way where it's a consistent habit and routine, and you're not doing it out of a reaction, right? You're not doing it because your child is having a meltdown and then you're going, okay, let's do the sensory diet. You need to make sure you're doing it beforehand. And also remember, sensory diets are not a quick fix. Just because you implement the sensory diet today does not mean meltdowns are just gonna suddenly stop. Sensory diets are something that you have to be consistent with. And this is one of the hardest things that I have found parents are having, is finding a way to make it consistent. But like I said, it is like any habit. And you have to be really mindful of it and make sure that you are, putting it into your own routine as well. Do it with them so that they get into the habit. Have visual charts for yourself to help remind you that this is what you need to do every morning or whenever your child gets home from school or right before bedtime, so that you don't forget to do it. Now, if talking about sensory diets and your child's sensory needs is resonating with you, I want to let you in on my course that I just released. It's all about emotional regulation, and specifically it helps kids that have sensory needs and who have all these different sensitivities or are understimulated all the time, that get into states of meltdowns and dysregulation. And if you really want to understand why your child's behaving the way they are, I break down the reasons for it in my course under these 5 pillars. Whenever there are issues within one of these 5 pillars, one being unfulfilled sensory needs, so this is going to be very applicable to you, but there might also be other contributors to your child's dysregulation. This course is going to lay it out so clear for you, and it's going to give you actionable tools on what you can do. Right now, I am offering a 35% off discount on my course. It's for a limited time offer, so make sure you get on this offer before it ends. All the information is in the description box. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Again, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys on the next one.